Well, every road I see leads away from me. There's not a single one that leads me home. The road keeps saying, friend, come see what's round the bend. So is it any wonder that I roam? All the places I have been keep calling me back again. Down in the pines I hear the cold winds blow. My heart keeps telling me, footloose and fancy free, and the road goes by and calls me as it goes. Well, maybe somewhere there's a someone waiting with a smile, and maybe there'll be some place I can stop and rest a while. And maybe you weren't meant to be just a rolling stone, and there's a road to travel on that leads you back to home.
If you're wondering why my face is red, I just got an itchy eye and been rubbing at it. All right. Well, it's one of those times where I forget that I'm on my chat tonight.
I don't think we've done this when you haven't forgot that.
I'm so used to not doing it. So anyway, yeah, welcome back, everybody. Don't know how many we got in there already, but yeah,
27.
Kind of a 27. Ooh, we're doing really good, actually. We weren't going to do Tales of the Trails until after the first of the year, because originally the plan is that this past Sunday I was going to get in my car, go to Wyoming, do some deer and goose hunting, and split some firewood with my buddy, and then come home. However, I was driving home from work Thursday night, Friday morning, whenever I was coming home, and my Jeep just kept going into the death wobble every time I'd hit 55 miles an hour. So I took it back to the shop and found out that, I had a little problem with the dampening rod up there on the tie rod system and the steering and all that jazz. Basically, the pump had leaked out oil, or the rod had leaked out oil, so it would dampen from one direction but not the other, which is why it didn't death wobble all the time. And I thought, you know what? Instead of taking a chance, I decided not to go up to Wyoming. That and the weather was a little bit crap up there. So we are here tonight, going to Wyoming next week. So when Bings Garrett's doing his Christmas concert, that works perfect for me.
So you ready to go through who's here?
Yeah, let's go through the list and then we'll get into what we're talking about tonight because we didn't put it in the title yet, I don't think.
Yeah, I forgot. I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
I didn't forget completely because I actually got a painting of the story, but then I forgot to put the name in the title. So, anyway, Louisiana Gray said this looks promising. Can't wait to see you there, Duke, and learn what. Can't wait to see you there, Duke. Learn what you have for us. I guess I should have proofread Duke, not Dude. William Schlosser says first of the 12 days of Christmas. CBJW, Caleb, says here I is. Texan 1836 says evening, Duke. Diane Houston says howdy, all. Oregon Outback said hello, what a week. The snow came, the snow went. Today felt like spring. Welcome to almost winter weather. George Gooding's in. He said, hope everybody is having a great evening. Jeremy P. said, hi, everybody. AR American said, good evening, folks. Louisiana Gray said, good evening to all. Looking forward to this. Just having fun said, good evening from Idaho. Doug Dukes is in. Hi. Good evening, all. Kathy Welch says hello. Kodak Tackman says evening, folks. Serpent Hanso says, hey-o. Snapper says, hi, guys. Gotsloco says, good evening. Kent says, good evening, good people. And the Tennessean said, howdy, folks. And Snapper said he's feeling better. And that's it. We are at 32 people watching. We're ready to roll.
All right, let's get going. So, The topic of tonight's discussion is the El
Christmas
Pueblo
in the Old West. Joy, celebration, happiness, warmth of heart, peace on
Not
earth, and
this one.
goodwill to men. Sorry, I'll quit interrupting you.
Not on this one here. So yeah, it's one of those things I was thinking like, oh, how can I tie this into Christmas? And then I thought, yeah, El Pueblo Massacre. And I thought, boy, this ain't going to be one of those happy Christmas stories. There ain't no Santa Claus in this one. And if he was, he'd be on
People
the end
do
of a
come
spear.
down the chimney.
Yeah, there's some of that. But anyway, we're going to be discussing the El Pueblo Massacre, which happened sometime between December 23rd and 25th, 1854. And it's a pretty notable event that took place here in Colorado history for this area. It's just 30 miles on that way from where I live is where that took place at, in the town of what's now Pueblo, Colorado. It was actually the first little settlement there. Before we get into that too far, I am going to say there's a disclaimer. There's one person I'm going to talk about here. It's got a name that some people might find offensive. So Mama Woods, if you're watching, just be ready. I'm going to say a word you're really not going to like. But anyway, it's the guy's name, and I'm one of those that I don't believe in altering and changing and censoring history. That's the way it was. That's the way it's going to be, and that's how it's going to be told on here. So anyway, we'll get started with it. So this story really kind of starts back. It's in that theme of the Santa Fe Trail that we did the last time we were around. This little particular area, southeastern Colorado, starts seeing a lot of activity when William Bent establishes his trading post, 1833, down close to where the confluence of the Purgatory and Arkansas rivers are. It's actually a few miles up from that, quite a few miles up. But anyway, he's one of the first ones to establish out here. There's a couple other guys that get going. And then about 10 years later, in the early 1840s, another group of trappers decide to establish their own trading post, and it's referred to as the El Pueblo. Now, it's kind of questionable, up in the air as to its actual 100% position. When I was reading online, just to kind of refresh myself on a couple spots, the way they described it and its position, I don't think the person had ever been to this part of Colorado, and I don't think they had ever looked at a map, because they said it was east of Fountain Creek, they said it was east of the Huerfano River and west of Fountain Creek. If you're not familiar with those, it's impossible to be that way. You just can't do it because they're swapped. Huerfano is to the east, Fountain Creek's to the west. So it's somewhere there on the north side of the Arkansas River. When it was established in 1842, of course, that time, that part of the Arkansas River, the north bank, was United States territory. South side was Mexico or Texas. It was kind of that disputed. But Mexico claimed it. The United States recognized Mexico's claims to Texas's, I guess you could say, to their disdain. But, they conducted, it was one of those places of trade. It was similar to Bent's Fort. A little bit more like a Sodom and Gomorrah, if you will. That was a term used to describe it from back in the day, was the Sodom and Gomorrah of the plains. But I've also heard that same phrase applied to Bent's Fort as them being both of them, the one Sodom, one Gomorrah. They said it was, just not a good place to be, unless you were friendly with the people that were there. A lot of notable trappers passed through that. One of those was Old Bill Williams. Old Bill Williams was noted to hang out up there. Several other guys hung up out there. William Bent, one of his traders, went over to compete and work for the competition there. So it was kind of a happening place, but not really to the scale that Bent St. Vrain Company had been. They get established there. The group of Mormons stay in 1846. And if you're not familiar, in 1846, we have this little event called the Mexican-American War breaks out, where at the end of that, we're going to gain everything on the south side of the Arkansas River. But the few Mormons come through with what was called the Mormon Battalion. And a few of them stayed over at the El Pueblo because they were trying to find a route to Utah without having to go all the way back, and up the Mormon Trail, which is pretty much the Oregon Trail, all the way to Salt Lake City, because that was kind of the long way, and it's getting close to wintertime, so, kind of hard to make it there if you have to go all the way back. And so they wound up staying the winter down in that area in 1846, and then found their way in 47. But the El Pueblo, like I said, kind of a little trading post. It dealt with Native Americans. It dealt with trappers. It dealt with New Mexican traders, just on a smaller scale. And one of the groups of the natives that it's going to deal with is the Utes. And if you don't know much about the Utes, I don't know a lot. But the Ute are one of the groups here in Colorado that did not move around a lot. They have stories and ties. They didn't really do a lot of migrating. There's archaeological evidence of them being down here in my area for about 8,000 years. Sites that are tied to Ute origins. Of course, as years went on, their culture and lifestyles evolved into different things, but they've pretty much been in this part of the Colorado for one of the longest. And so by the time that the Anglos come around, they kind of hang up in the mountains in the summertime, and in the winter, they come down on the plains. That's kind of the smart way to do things. You're cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter, or not as cold in the winter, or whichever. And the Ute had, I'll just say, it was interesting relations with Anglos. There were a handful of trappers that were friendly with the Ute. For the most part, that was pretty rare. It's not that they weren't friendly, they just weren't exactly overly social. And if you showed up in their territory and they find you and you're uninvited and they don't know you and they don't like you, well, you're going to have to pay a toll or some kind. You may not get out of there with anything more than what the good Lord gave you on the day you were born, if you even get away with that. And so there was always some little tensions, but for the most part, generally speaking, they're pretty peaceful. It's just they've got their strange ways that they do things. And as trade and stuff, as you start getting more and more trappers coming in the mountains, they start trading more. They become very good friends with old Bill Williams, that guy I mentioned before, and a few others. And by the time you start getting in the late 1840s and early 1850s, they're really starting to get pretty peaceful with the Anglos coming in. Now, that being said, there was one incident sometime in the 1840s, early 1840s, that involved the Bent St. Vrain Company. Now, the Utes had come down out of the mountains, expressed extreme interest in trading with William Bent because they wanted guns. Because at the time when, the Arkansas River's that dividing line, and they're in what's Mexico, and these other tribes that are traditionally their enemies are in the United States, their enemy tribes are getting guns. In Mexico at that time, it was illegal to trade guns to the natives, but you could trade alcohol. In the United States, it was the opposite. You could give them all the guns you want, but you can't trade alcohol. And so there's a few traders that took advantage of that, bring in alcohol from the United States, buy guns from, bring in alcohol from Mexico, bring in guns from the United States, and do the trading kind of in the Colorado area. Antoine Rubidoux was one of those that took part in doing that. But anyway, the Utes are wanting to get their hands on firearms because they don't have them. And so they come to William Bent to try to trade with him, and they'd set up peaceful relations, come down, said, yeah, we'd love to trade with you. And William Bent's way of trading had been with the Cheyenne and several other tribes is that when the wintertime comes and it's time to do the trade, you load up mules, wagons, depending on how far you got to go, what you're carrying, and you send a trader out to the camps, each individual little camp. And a lot of times you have that trader marry into that tribe, take a native wife from that tribe, and that kind of cements the relation there, gives you a monopoly on that group. And so he goes to do this tactic the following year with the Utes. He loads up a caravan, sends it to the Utes, and the Utes find it and they say, "What are you doing here? We didn't invite you to come here at this time. You will turn over your goods, or we're going to wipe you out." And William Bent was not going to be taken as a fool on this. And he says, "You want them? Come get them." They have a small fight. The Utes don't get the goods. William Bent just packs his stuff up and heads back for his trading post. And that's kind of the end of it. Or so they thought. And the following year, the Utes once again come to the fort and want to trade. And William Bent says, "No, ain't happening. Shut the door. Don't let them in." So they shut the door. Utes are kind of upset that they're not wanting to let them in, do business. They start pounding on the door, and one Ute gets extremely upset, and he starts launching arrows over the walls. And this is the part that I'm going to use a word that some people might not enjoy, but like I said, it's part of history. There was one particular trader that worked for William Bent. He was an Irishman. His last name was Murray. I can't remember his first name, but that's all right. He's always listed by the nickname the Indians gave him, which is goddamn, because he said that word so often that they thought that that was what he was called. And so old goddamn Murray gets up on top of the wall as this Indian is launching arrows off of it, takes his musket and shoots this Ute man. And that pretty much puts an end to the trade relations between the Utes and the Bent St. Vrain Company. However, they're still wanting to get their hands on guns, and so they start trading and interacting with the inhabitants of El Pueblo. And so as you go on through the 1840s, El Pueblo continues to be kind of that den of sin, if you will. Character from the Fort Laramie area, John Reshaw Sr., travels to El Pueblo in the 1840s at some point to trade whiskey with William Guerrier and or Bill Geary, as he's often called. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but they call him Bill Geary as a common name in some of the historical accounts.
Gerard, and Gary.
Or Guerrier. That's what it was. William Guerrier.
Guerrier.
Yeah. And they call him Bill Geary. So, and then, yeah, half of them are named Frank. So it continues to operate. And at the end of the Mexican-American War, of course, that really puts kind of a detriment to some of the trade that takes place out here. Not all of it, but it does have an effect. But this little community just continues to operate. You know, it's got a population of, you know, anywhere between 20 to 50, depending on the year, the season, what's going on. At one point in time, after old Bill Williams makes enemies with the Ute, because they had asked him to go to Santa Fe to sell their furs, and he did that, and then he got drunk on the money and blew all their money on alcohol and decided that he was going to fight them instead of apologize. He's going to lead the Fremont expedition up in the mountains. He's going to get caught up there and help cache the goods, and then he fights the Utes, and then he gets wounded. He heads back to El Pueblo, and not too long after that, he takes off the mountains for the last time. The Utes find him and kill him, and apparently they had enough respect for him, even still, after he'd robbed them and fought them, that they gave him the burial equivalent to a chief. And so, even though they can be a rough lot, they're very honorable. You can definitely see it in the record. Anytime they're mentioned, is they're honorable. But they're still trying to get their hands on guns. They're still trying to keep peace with the Anglos because they can kind of see the writing on the wall that time is starting to tick away. And big changes are going to come in, like a lot of the tribes out here in the West. And some of the older ones, you know, the older chiefs are suing for peace. They're still wanting to get their hands on guns. And as you get into the early 1850s, this is still true. And the governor of New Mexico at that time, and I'm going to have to go over here and find my cheat sheet. Bear with me because I can't remember his name. It was Governor Merriweather.
I was about to say, did we just discuss him?
Governor David Merriweather of New Mexico in 1853 to 54. They meet with him, continue talking peace, trying to get their hands on guns. They refuse to give them guns. Nobody will give the Utes guns. And that's because there's that unpredictable nature that they tend to have. If we give them these guns, are they going to turn around and use them against us to get more guns? And so he doesn't give them guns, but what he does give them is food and blankets. And this is where that age-old story of they intentionally trade diseased blankets to the natives comes in. Was it intentional or was it by accident? Either way, after they make this trade, all of the peace chiefs contract smallpox. The entire tribe's going to contract smallpox. And almost all of your older peace chiefs that have been trying to maintain the quiet, trying to maintain peaceful relations with the whites, die. And those that survive are the younger men that, they still want to fight. And that's one thing you notice with a lot of these groups out here on the plains is that the older chiefs want to go the more peaceful route. Not always the case, but for the most part, a lot of the older chiefs want to go a more peaceful route. It's the younger chiefs that want to fight. They haven't learned yet, that there is another way besides fighting. And of course, sometimes there is no other way but to fight. So after the chiefs die from the smallpox, the Ute peace policy that they've had at this point is now completely null and void. And so they decide it is time to hit back. It's basically going to be retaliation. They're going to retaliate for their chiefs dying. And this is in 1854 at this point. And so one of the first places they're going to hit somewhere, either December 23rd, 24th, or Christmas morning. Don't know. Just know it's within those few days. They're going to show up at El Pueblo. And the new chief that's kind of leading them, this particular group anyway, is a man called Tierra Blanco, or White Earth in English. And one thing you're going to notice that the Utes being there in New Mexico, which is traditionally in Mexico, a lot of them have Mexican names. Were the chief that was prior to Tierra Blanco, and I'm going to look up that name because I can't remember it. Chico Velazquez is what name he was given. Chico Velazquez will die, of course, from smallpox. Tierra Blanco, White Earth will take over. And when they arrive at El Pueblo, Tierra Blanco meets with the leader of El Pueblo and starts talking with him cordially, like he normally did. They didn't think anything was wrong. And then the attack is going to commence. Not everybody was killed in the attack, and it's not quite clear exactly how long it lasts, but a good number of the people that were there were killed, and I've got to look and see my numbers, so I apologize for having to double check on myself, but this is one of those things. It's been a while since I read up on it, so I've happened to refresh my memory. Two survivors. 2 people survived the attack. Let's see, 6 killed, 2 bodies never found, and 2 people survived. So there wasn't a lot of people at El Pueblo at this time. This is one of those times where there weren't a lot hanging around. But even though this was a small attack, just a few people killed, the psychological factor that played in with that just scared the people that were in the area. And so, excuse me, I've been drinking Coke. I've got the belches. From 1833 to 1840 something, there had been some form in one place or another of colonization, if you will, because really these are kind of the first settlements. Some form of settlement that's taking place. Bent St. Vrain Company. There was another guy by the name of Gant that had a trading post that probably turned into the El Pueblo. It's probably, if it wasn't the same place, it was really close to it. El Pueblo pops up as a community. El Pueblo continues to exist after William Bent abandons his fort. And at this point, it becomes a stage. It's starting to become a stagecoach station. But there's not a lot of settlement. There's a little bit of settlement starting to go on. One of the guys that's starting to kind of settle in that area is good old Uncle Dick Wooten. At this point in the 50s, he's trying to start a ranch and farm somewhere along the Arkansas River. If I remember right, at this point, he has established a ranch near the Huerfano and the Arkansas River. And that is not very far from where El Pueblo's at. It's actually within today probably a 20-minute drive, 30-minute drive, closer to 20. And so he mentions, not being, well, he didn't really say scared, but he wasn't confident that he wouldn't be hit next. Several other people that were in the area, like I said, there weren't a lot of them, but there were a few starting. Several other people in the area decide to pack up and move out. And that particular area is not going to be settled again until you start getting into the Pikes Peak Gold Rush days. And that's going to be another 5 years down the road. So for 5 years, they pretty much scared everybody out of this territory because they never know when they could be attacked. And so it's a small, very small portion of the history down here in this area. But like I said, it had some lingering impacts that lingered for quite a few years in this area. And of course, after that, I can't speak much because, to be honest with you, I have not read up much on what's going on down here with the Ute in Colorado. I know by the 1880s, in fact, I think it was in the 1870s, there was, it was either late 60s, early 70s, there was some conflict there with the U.S. government once again. There was a few little squabbles with them in the during the Civil War years, but by the time the 1880s run around, it's pretty much just the Apache that are getting down to being the last ones that are still fighting the U.S. government. The rest have been confined to reservations. And most of the Ute in Colorado area, they were sent to a reservation that's now still within Colorado. There's actually two of them, and I don't remember their names, but they're down over around Mesa Verde in there.
Mm-hmm.
So this one, I guess, was kind of a quick one here tonight.
We got a lot of people. Let me go through the comments, and then there's some discussion going on over here we'll get into.
Yeah.
Mill Creek Range said, "Evening, everyone. This week I'm in Omaha." Carl Reed said, "Evening, everyone. How's everyone tonight?" Doug Dukes wants to know, was the Mormon battalion headed north, home, or south in the Mexican-American War of 1846?
So the Mormon battalion, I'm trying to remember on this one because I did not read up much on them because I couldn't find the books. Actually, when I was out at Bent's Fort, the guy that came in and replaced my the lead, he was into that big. So I know they came out. Basically, they were told they wouldn't be persecuted if they come out and they'd fight for the U.S. government. So they sent a battalion out. And it was part of Stephen Watts Kearney's 1,400 troop contingent. I forget how many they sent out here, but they wound up staying down in this area. A good portion of them stayed with Donovan down in New Mexico, down in Santa Fe in there. But they were out here until towards the end of the war, and then they went back home. And I don't know if they went the south route or north route. I know they didn't go over the mountains. That's what they tried. And they wound up staying at El Pueblo through 46 and into the spring of 47. But I do know eventually they did get to Utah.
Mm-hmm. Oregon Outback says, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
My guess would be probably if they didn't go north on the old Trapper Trail to the Oregon Trail, and actually that would have been probably one of the easiest routes. You go up Fountain Creek, then you take Cherry Creek, and keep going north, just follow that front range. And that was an old trail that a lot of those trappers would use going up and down the mountains. But to be honest, I can't say 100% which route they took. Otherwise, it's back to Missouri and then back north along the Oregon Trail.
Oregon Outback says these two Utes. Pardon me? Utes. These two Utes.
Oh, boy.
Moving on. Desert Boy said, howdy, y'all. Oregon Outback said, I love stories about how people got their nicknames. Tim O'Neill says, Duke, anything about orphan trains to the west or wolf boys? Do you know? I think you meant to say, do you know anything about orphan trains going west?
Orphan trains? No, I don't know. I just know Werfeno means orphan. That's how it got its name. And I don't know the story of that, but that's the Werfeno River that they got confused online when they was trying to say where El Pueblo is at. And I'm like, you guys have no clue.
The Saboteur 45 is in, says howdy.
Hey, Saboteur.
Louisiana Gray said there's no fame in peace. Okay, let me see. I'm going to go through here, see what's written down here, and then we'll go back to those questions there. So Doug Dukes wants to know, Duke, so the Mormons never made it to Mexico for the fight?
There was one fight they partook in, and like I said, I don't know the details. It was down in northern Mexico. Because they came out of New Mexico and went down there. Doniphan's March, I think, is what it's called. They were under Doniphan. I want to say it was Chihuahua. They were in northern Chihuahua, maybe Coahuila. Because they went down kind of around where El Paso's at. But anyway, yeah, they went down through there. Attacked a village in northern Mexico and came back up. But yeah, that's Doniphan's March. And I know what happened. I just don't know the details on it.
Are you still there?
But it was kind of yeah, I'm still here. Are you still there?
Yeah, you started to freeze just a little bit.
Yeah.
Desert Boys. Reed Desert Boy said, I noticed on the map there was a Bent's Old Fort and New Fort, and then there was Fort Lyon and Fort Wise in between. Was El Pueblo Bent's Fort, and why did it move?
No, El Pueblo was not. So, William Bent, when he first got started, had a wooden stockade somewhere up around Pueblo. And I have read many accounts as to its location. I do not know 100% where it was at. Several accounts say Fountain Creek, which, if you've been to Pueblo, Colorado, it's kind of in the middle of things. Because Fountain Creek and the Arkansas come together there. Now, William Bent abandoned that when they opened Bent's Old Fort, which they opened right around 1833. That was the adobe building. So his trading post prior to that, like I said, wooden stockade. That's where he made friends with the Cheyenne, because the Cheyenne had come in to trade. They noticed some Comanches riding up. William Bent hid the Cheyenne man, told the Comanches that he had left. The Comanches were actually looking for the Cheyenne guy because the Arkansas River was the dividing line of their territory, and they would hit each other north and south of that river until finally they made a peace agreement to kind of not do that, but that kind of fell back and forth. And at Bent's Fort, yeah, there's several incidents that took place. So anyway, William Bent hit him. The Comanche warriors left. The Cheyenne man, became friends with Bent, and the whole tribe became friends with William Bent. And then that's when they start moving down into the Arkansas River Valley, is so they can trade with him. So William Bent basically influenced the movement of the group of Southern Cheyennes down into this part of the country. They had come down in here, but they were still kind of up around the South Platte area, and he pulled them down in, and he pulled the Arapaho down with them. So that was established then in 1833. There was a trader named Gant that established a trading post up there where William Bent had his stockade. William Bent put him out of business because Bent St. Vrain Company was not a small company at this time. They were probably second to the American Fur Company in this area. They were a very large trading entity. And so they put him out of business pretty quick, just, drive prices down to where he can't afford to stay in business. And then after that, 1842, El Pueblo gets started up, and it's not really a major trading post. It's just a bunch of old trappers got tired of wintering up in the high country and decided to start wintering down at this place and built a little trading post out of it. And it was competition. One of the things that Charles Bent, who was one of the heads, probably the head of Bent St. Vrain Company equals Saron St. Vrain, wrote several letters complaining about them trading alcohol. And so, El Pueblo was not tied to Bent's Fort. The only tie they really had, if my memory serves me right, give me 1 second. I go grab the book.
Okay.
If I remember right, it was this guy here, Alexander Barclay. I got to double check that. But if I remember right, he went to the El Pueblo and left the Bent St. Vrain Company. And he was a superintendent of Bent's Fort for a number of years. Let me see. Yeah, he became an independent trader in 1842. And then he was trader at Hardscrabble in Pueblo from 1844 to 48. And he kept his diary here. But Barclay was definitely higher up. He was a pretty respected trader, I should say, there at Bent's Fort, considering they made him superintendent while they went around and did other business other places. So basically, when William Bent wasn't there, Saron St. Vrain or Charlie Bent, Barclay was running the show. So bourgeois, that's what the word I'm looking for. He was a bourgeois. So so Bent's Fort's going to operate till 1849, and then the cholera puts them out of business, along with threats that the military is going to take over. And William Bent is strongly believed he partially destroyed the fort. And, when they did the archaeology down there, the powder magazine was heavily scorched. And if you're picking up and leaving, you're going to take powder with you, unless you're intending to blow something up. And so I'm pretty sure he intended to blow it up. At least damage it enough that somebody was going to have to put a lot of work into it to keep it going. The explosion resulted in a fire that destroyed most of the western side of the fort. Now, the walls were still standing, but the roofs had caved in because the timbers had burned out. But anyway, after that, a few years later, 1854, William Bent establishes his new trading post that gets the name Bent's New Fort. And that's when you get Bent's Old Fort and Bent's New Fort. And that he operates for about 4 or 5 years, and then he turns that over to the military. Basically leases it. And they establish Fort Wise. And they use his trading post as a quartermaster shop. But it's named after Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. Well, when the Civil War breaks out, Wise becomes an officer in the Confederate Army, and the Union does not want a fort named after a Confederate officer. So they changed it to Fort Lyon, the first Union officer killed during the Civil War, I think at Stones River. And so that becomes Fort Lyon. That's the Fort Lyon that Shivington will march out of when he goes north to attack Black Kettle. In 1868, Fort Lyon has flooded several times, and the Army has decided that it was a poor choice to build there. And there's no record of it, but I think Bent's Fort came close to flooding, because when William Bent, Bent's Old Fort, because when William Bent built the new fort, he built it on top of the hill overlooking the river. Well, when the Army came in and built Fort Wise and then Fort Lyon, they used his as quartermaster, and then they built their main buildings down in this floodplain. And if you're standing there looking, it is in a floodplain. It don't take a lot of water to flood that. And so it flooded several times. So in 1868, they picked up and they moved to where Fort Lyon is currently at on the map today. Historical maps is called Fort Lyon No. 2. And that was in operation until the 1940s. And then it became the state mental asylum. Then it became the state prison hospital. It was still the prison hospital when I was a little kid, because when you go down there, you could not get in unless you were there to see somebody. Then it was decommissioned as that, and now it's a state rehabilitation center for folks that are basically for folks that have had problems with addiction and folks that have been on substances so long that they cannot live on their own anymore. So that's currently what it is. A lot of the buildings are still standing. A good chunk of the buildings are 1900s and newer, but the cavalry stables are still standing there. In fact, when I go duck hunting, there's a little state wildlife area there. When I go duck hunting, I drive right past the cavalry stables every time I go down there. I wish it was still accessible to the public, but it's one of those things that I don't think it'll ever become a historic site. It should, because it has so much history here. But yeah, that's kind of the progression of those forts. But El Pueblo and Bent's Fort were never the same entity. But there were several men that operated there that had operated with Bent's Fort at one time or
another. Tim O'Neill said, "Are you near Prairieville, Kansas?"
I'm not.
I don't even know where Prairieville, Kansas is. I know where Prairie Village, Kansas is. That's in Kansas City. It's in Johnson County. Let's see. There was a couple more here. Antique Gunslinger said, Duke has so much in his head to remember. If he wants to learn something new, he has to forget something first.
Hit the nail on the head there.
Oregon Outback said, Lyon was killed at Wilson Creek, Southwest Missouri.
Creek.
Yeah.
That's what it
yes,
was.
Wilson Creek. We done them rough that day. Tim O'Neill said, live on top of the hill. It's worth the walk. I live in Lana. Reed Desert Boy said, thanks, Duke. I was going to go back up here because they were talking about the blankets, and I didn't know how far you want to get into it because some people can turn history political. Not anybody in our chat, obviously, but do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So, and this definitely stems back to pretty much from colonization of the North American continent by Anglos, not the Viking Anglos. So post Columbus, there was, there was commerce established with the native tribes on the East Coast, and that's one of the things that, as the progression west of Anglo society came along, there's always commerce, a period of peaceful commerce that takes place there. The problem is that you have two groups of people that a lot of times have never interacted before. And so when you don't have that interaction, one group has diseases and another group has a different set of diseases, and the others you're not immune to the opposite side's diseases. And so whereas the Anglos had some tolerance to smallpox at this point, and that's not to say there weren't outbreaks. Of course there were outbreaks. There were outbreaks during the American Revolution. Was it John Quincy Adams' family caught smallpox? Or not John Quincy, John Adams. Well, yeah, it's John Quincy Adams' family, but John Adams' family, they got yeah, all the same family. And so whether or not there was intentional trading that took place, I don't know. I wasn't there. But when you look at it from an economic standpoint, these big operations, Hudson's Bay, American Fur Company, Bent St. Vrain Company, Rocky Mountain Fur Company.
It doesn't pay well.
does not behoove you to intentionally kill off your customers.
Mm-mm.
If you do that, you're not going to be in operation for very long. And they're just like with this El Pueblo incident. After blankets were issued, those people were very upset and went out for revenge. The Comanches, one of the reasons why they were pretty much hostile to any Anglos right from the get-go was from disease. They had gotten, scarlet fever, and they had gotten mumps and other diseases that had come through. And so that's one of the reasons why they were definitely more resistant to Anglo settlement. Plus, also, you got the Texans that have really aggravated them for a long time. But yeah, it was not good economics for a trading post to intentionally trade diseased blankets. Now, that being said, were there guys that intentionally did it? Oh, I'm sure there were. There's evil everywhere you go. I would not be one bit surprised that somebody somewhere along the line decided that, hey, these blankets have been exposed to smallpox. Let's go out here and trade them off to these people. But as a wide scope, general way of doing things, I don't think it was on a wide scale intent.
Yeah.
It was one of those, it was a bad thing that happened from good intentions.
I agree with you. Just to give it, if you don't mind, I'll give you my little 2 cents on it. Not getting political or anything, but it's a very politically touchy subject. I see it all the time on History Chat. But Pasteur is not going to even establish true germ theory till 1861. But there's always a caveat here. That's not saying people didn't already know that, hey, this person has pox. If we go around them, we get it too. They could figure that thing out. But like when people talk about the Hudson's Bay Company, I've seen videos where people are like trying to make the Indian blanket a symbol of hate, shall we say?
Right.
The classic striped Hudson's Bay. And for Hudson's Bay, in order to pull that off, if they had, I feel like they would have had to have not only known where the smallpox hit, they would have had to have people that they knew were immune to keep the blankets, store the blankets, and then have people they knew were immune deliver the blankets, or else it's a kamikaze suicide mission. I find that very hard to believe that all that could take place before germ theories even are really established.
I'll put it this way, is that it was not used as a weapon of mass destruction in those early days like it could be used in modern times.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, because obviously people aren't stupid. They know we get around these people with smallpox, we get it too. But I feel like it would be a very, very intricate thing to pull off. And,
smallpox outbreaks, they did happen pretty regularly amongst the tribes. In fact, in the Cheyenne winter count, it's listed on the winter count. They have a picture of a man with the red spots all over his body. So every tribe, just about every tribe suffered it. Another big one was cholera. 1849 was a worldwide epidemic. And it was one of those that hit at the worst possible time when it comes to the natives, because at the time that it hit, they discovered gold in California, and you have a massive amount of people going across the country. It's like 75,000. Now, 75,000 people, that don't sound like nothing today. At that time, that was the most that had ever come across that country. Well, I shouldn't say for 75. It was more like 45,000. Still, that's more people than had ever come across in 1 year. That was a record year. The year before, I don't even think really broke 10,000. If my memory serves me right. So you have that many people come through. All the tribes caught it along the Oregon Trail, along the Santa Fe Trail. The Southern Cheyenne lost half of their number from cholera. So yeah, epidemics, they happened. And that led to Bent St. Vrain, William Bent abandoning Fort William, Bent's old fort. The story there is that the Southern Cheyenne had found out the northern tribes were catching it. The Northern Cheyenne were catching it. And they'd come to talk with William Bent because, he's from that world. This is a white man's disease. He knows he can provide information. They show up at the fort waiting for him to show up because he's coming in with a trade caravan that's supposed to arrive. And while they're waiting for him, suddenly they start getting sick and start dying.
Mm-hmm.
And William Bent felt like, well, it's probably going to, and it could have been, it takes one sick person to start it, and half their number are gone.
Yep.
But yeah, you see that? You see those little outbreaks, these little epidemics break out all the time. There's another trading post that I forget which one it was. I was talking with one of my friends that's in the AMM. He was telling me about it. That when they excavated that, did the archaeology, they found molten lead. This trading post had been burned because of disease outbreak, and I think it was smallpox. And that was the speculation as to why it was burnt down. And when they found it, he said, they found puddles of lead that had melted in the fire. And he says, lead is one of those things you don't leave behind.
Mm-mm.
So to have burned that tells you that they were scared of some disease and they burnt everything.
Yep.
Because that was the way you solved it back then. Somebody gets sick and dies.
Mm-hmm.
You don't give their goods to somebody else. You go burn it.
Yeah, and I often wonder if, like, when I read the history of my local area, there's always talk of, especially, I don't know if they did this for every native, but it's for sure chiefs, is when they die, they kill the horse, bury the chief and the horse together, and they burn his, well, it's not teepee. The particular natives at the time here was huts. They burn the hut and all of his, everything that he has, even his wife's clothing is all burned, and they start over again. So That's what I've read anyway. And I wonder if that has something to do with that.
And that's, not all tribes do it. Every tribe has their own different, when you're dealing with tribes, you're dealing with completely different cultures. Each tribe has their beliefs, their system, their way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And so every one of them is different. Some of them, they burn the bodies. Out in California, there are several tribes that would burn the bodies. It was the guy they found in California wandering around the late 1800s. It was the last, they call him the last, Ishi.
Mm-hmm.
His people would do that kind of thing. Out here on the plains, it's a scaffold burial.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the body's decomposed, then it may be reburied somewhere else. Every tribe's got their own little things.
Yeah. It was mentioned in the book I was reading, and I got to make sure I get this right, because they did mention the Cheyenne on scaffold burials up on the hills, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the Osage that were here before them, the older Osage. They were being referred to as the poor Indians at the time. But I don't know what that is, but that's how they talked about it back then. But those were the ones that buried everything. According to the book, I don't know if that's real or not. It could just be something somebody made up.
That's one of those things I'd have to read up on it, because most of the tribes I've done any research on is tribes that deal with the areas I was in. So when I was at Bent's Fort, primarily it was Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Comanche. So I did research on them. And then up at Fort Laramie, it was Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow. So I've read up on those. But yeah. And I probably should have read up more on the Ute before I got into this conversation, but this was just kind of one of those. Yeah.
So Doug Dukes, Jersey Reds, Annie says, evening, Duke. Tim O'Neill said Prairieville, middle north border, looks like a backyard like Kansas. We had a hurricane. He said, bet you thought there was nothing due north of Fort Hays. Yeah, I've been north of Fort Hays every time I go see Duke. I just don't always remember what's north of Fort Hays till I get up to Scotts Bluff.
Yeah, it's kind of a barren strip between there and the Platte River.
Yeah. while he's looking for the plat. Jersey Red said, "Evening, Duke." Doug Duke said, "Big disease with Comanche was cholera." You kind of covered that.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that was in 49 as well, because it hit everybody. It was a worldwide pandemic. But if I remember right, they got hit in the 30s, because they got something from New Mexico, or from Mexico. The New Mexico traders, the Comancheros. I just don't remember what it was, but I know measles was listed as one of them.
Okay, so I don't know Mormon history that well, so I don't know if I can pronounce this. Red Desert Boy said, "Did the Mormons go to Mexico during the Mexican-American War because they had the state of Deseret at the time, which went into eastern Colorado and northwest corner of New Mexico and felt threatened?"
No, the whole reason the Mormons agreed to join was basically to avoid persecution. Because in 1846, they are in the process of getting ready to head for the Great Salt Lake. There's a few that are heading out there, but Brigham Young doesn't really start moving them until 1847. So I think that was part of the thing was, you fight for us, we'll leave you alone, then you can go move wherever you want to move to. But really, Salt Lake City hadn't really been established once they came down the trail in 46. It really doesn't get set up until 47, because that was the first big Mormon group that went out was 47. I know that group that came through in 46 were trying to get over there, so I know that they were planning on heading there. But yeah, part of that why they signed up to fight was they wouldn't receive persecution. And then of course they get out to Utah, they establish their little state, if you will, and then will become Utah. And then you have a little incident that gets often referred to as the Mormon Rebellion a few years later, and that actually turns into not such a big deal anymore, but almost came to blows. And the funny thing of it is at the end of it, the U.S. soldiers arrive at Salt Lake City starving, freezing, and they come to a peaceful arrangement, and the Mormons give them food, give them clothing, and then to save face, the general asks, well, can we march through Salt Lake City? And they basically tell them, yeah, you can march right on through and camp out on the south side of town.
Yeah. Oh, that's kind of funny. It probably wasn't funny at the time.
Well, it's one of those, your army can look good, but they're not camping in our town.
Desert Boy said good points about the blankets, Garrett. Thank you. Like I said, I don't know anything for sure 100% one way or the other. That's just my thoughts on the subject. Because it gets hairy when you try to discuss that with some people online. Tim O'Neill said, when I was at school in New Hampshire, my Hudson blanket coat saved me. They still sell them. Yeah. Don't you have some Hudson Bay material? Yeah. They're expensive now. I can tell you that much.
I got mine on eBay. I paid $125 a piece. The first one I bought was a red one that it looked brand new, and when it showed up, it was well used and abused. Second one I bought was a white candy stripe. I turned that into a coat. I paid $125 for it, and it had one moth-eaten spot on it, and that was it.
Did you make it the third
one? Yeah, I did. And then, I tried to make a capote, and I screwed that up, so it's actually more of a trench coat. But so on the pattern, it shows the 4 stripes about belly level. So I put the 4 stripes belly level. The problem is that the picture they were showing was a single black stripe on a red or a green or a blue. I've got the candy stripe, which has 4 bars on it. And so when it was all said and done, I didn't have enough material left over to make a hood. And I had a coat that goes down halfway to my ankles.
It's like a blanket. You just cut 2 inches off the bottom, sew it on the top.
Yeah, no kidding. So I decided to heck with it. I made a double-breasted kind of a frock coat, and I lined it. And then when it wraps around it doesn't wrap around right, so I got to go in the back at some point and cut a slit up the back so that it actually covers my legs because it only comes over to my knees. But the problem was that it's sitting here in the closet. Well, I got a moth infestation when I was up in Wyoming, and so I lost a deer hide, I lost a bunch of turkey feathers, and they got into that thing, and they chewed that thing. It's got holes all over it. I got to go back and patch it, but it looks really good now. It looks like it's historically been used. And then the third one I got, the moths got in it. It's a green one. I paid $125 for it too. But yeah, those dead gun moths did a number on my blankets.
Yep. Well, we may have just hit a milestone marker since we started Tales of the Trails. We just hit 60 people.
Holy Moses. I think we've had one that was up there high, but I don't remember how high.
Yeah. I don't know if since we've started calling it Tales of the Trail, we've had one. We might have. We very well might have. Doug Duke said Ishii died of TB in 1916.
That's right. It was after 1900 that they found him. And they thought his tribe had been completely wiped out because one of the biggest areas where tribes were completely wiped out was California, because there's so much population moved in there in such a short time, and they just used a complete process of eradication out there. And that's one of those things that I probably won't talk about it because there ain't a good thing to really say about what happened out there. But Ishii's tribe was one of those that they pretty much were just completely annihilated. It was a complete genocide out there.
Mm-hmm. Kodak Tackman said, still hanging in there, fellas. Thought I'd pop in over here too. Hey, maybe that's how we got 60 people watching on both channels.
There we
go. Jared 1860 said, y'all mean to tell us there was a deadly disease and virus before COVID?
COVID's pretty mild compared to cholera and smallpox.
Or the plague.
I mean, COVID did a number. There ain't no doubt about it. Getting on the level of the what was it, the 1918 flu, 1919 flu.
Yeah, I don't know if it was quite on that level. That was like 25% of the population.
Yeah, heavy. But it was getting close. It was definitely getting up there. But yeah, it's one of those things. It became such a political issue so quickly that
there's a 9 o'clock train.
9 o'clock train. Well, 8:37 train.
Oh, okay.
I got to
Saboteur. Okay, I'll get you a Saboteur's question when you get back. Tim O'Neill said those were the Osage Indians after they met Daniel Boone and showed him beaver until they struck oil. Not enough likes yet. Oh, yeah. If you guys want to go ahead and click a like on the video you're watching, that'll do us a big favor. Everything Black Powder said, howdy, boys. I'm a day late and $1 short as usual. Yeah, and you probably burned up all the toilet paper, too. Gotsluka said the pandemic of 1824 or 25 took its toll on the native population of California. Yep. Saboteur asked, with Lakota and Kansas during the Hannix War.
Hancock.
Hancock. What is it, Hannix? I was already mispronouncing the next part. Did you think them in the, I believe he was saying Comanche.
Yep.
At least had a passing of each other.
I wouldn't be surprised. But at that point, I don't think the Comanches and the southern tribes had quite made their alliance yet. I know they'd made peace with each other, but they hadn't really made their big alliance. But I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't a few Comanches up there at this point. Because I'm trying to think, when did they? I don't know if it was the Treaty of the Little Arkansas, but I know they had in the 1840s, they gathered just outside of Bent's Fort, and this was a peace treaty that actually didn't involve the government. It was basically a peace agreement between the traders and the native tribes. It was in the 1840s, and the Comanches and the Cheyenne agreed to not fight each other anymore. To be friendly, because William Bent didn't want them fighting. He wanted to make money off of both sides. And so if they're fighting, that means less time out there hunting buffalo, which means less money for William Bent to make off buffalo robes. So he had them come together, and they made basically agreement, said they wouldn't fight anymore. William Bent, I think that was 1841 because William Bent sent traders down to the panhandle of Texas on the Canadian River, and they established Fort Adobe. And they had about 5 little trading posts along that. Fort Adobe was the main one. And it only lasted a couple of years, and then the Kiowa got word that the Comanches were very upset, probably with the fact that Texas was going to become part of the United States. And so the Comanches threatened to wipe out every white man on the Canadian, and William Bent strategically placed powder kegs throughout Fort Adobe and blew it up so that the Comanches could not use it as a stronghold. It gives you a pretty good idea. That's what he did at Bent's Fort too, when he abandoned it. But anyway, that kind of brought about the end of the trade part of that piece. But they always they fighting between the Comanches and the Cheyennes and Arapahoes pretty much had gone away at that point. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't a few in the area, because that's one of those areas. It's kind of that buffer zone between, that Arkansas River is kind of the dividing line, but you'd see them on either side.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an event prior, if I remember right, it was prior to, Bent's little peace treaty they had there outside the fort. Supposedly the Cheyenne had stolen a bunch of horses from the Comanches and brought them and traded them at Bent's Fort, because Bent's Fort not only traded buffalo robes. The fur trade, the buffalo robes were kind of the main staple, but a lot of these trading posts would trade anything: horses, mules, cattle, oxen. And so one of the things that Cheyenne would trade along with the buffalo robes was horses. And supposedly they went down, raided a Comanche village, stole their horses, brought them up to Bent's Fort, traded them to Bent. And a Comanche war party lit out after him, found the horses at Bent's Fort, and they decided they was going to take them back. And the herdsman saw the Comanches coming, decided he was going to try to save the animals, thought he had time, went out to gather them up. Well, before he could get back to the fort, the Comanches caught him and killed him and made off with a good portion of the stock. One of the accounts, first-hand accounts there, says that he had most of the horses in through the back gate when they finally caught up to him and shot him and killed him. But it's the only time that a fight with the Comanches took place at Bent's Fort. So there was 2 incidents where there was somebody killed at Bent's Fort involving natives. One was with the Utes that I talked about earlier in the talk, and then this incident with the Comanches.
Oh, we kind of run out of comments momentarily. They're just talking about toilet paper powder. Jake said he's about to start testing different brands. So your cries have been heard, Duke.
I'm kind of curious how Sherman does, but I don't know. After that toilet paper pandemic, I'm not in a big hurry to start using my toilet paper for powder. I think I can make by with what Go-Ex I've got. It's funny. The other night I was in my cabinet and I thought, man, I got to go to town and buy toilet paper. And I opened the one cabinet looking for something else, and I found 12-pack toilet paper I never knew I had.
Stuff you've been saving since the big rush of 2020.
Exactly what I did. Because I remember, after I seen it, I remember very clearly what happened. Is that we were so desperate for toilet paper around here, we was borrowing from everybody, and I found some at Walmart, and I snuck it into my house one night and put it in there so nobody would steal it from me.
Oh, we just hit 65.
All right.
Bouncing around.
But
I don't know how accurate that counter is sometimes.
Sometimes it's a little off, yeah. Yeah, so that's basically, the El Pueblo. Of course, we covered that in the first 30 minutes. The last 30 minutes has been other history stuff, but the El Pueblo Massacre is not a real fun Christmas story, but it's one of those things that did happen. And like I said, it did leave a mark out here, and good sources on that one, of course. Uncle Dick Wooten's book talks about it now with Uncle Dick Wooten. He's just writing a lot of this from memory. So some of it, can be off a little bit. But I think David Lavender's Bent's Fort. I got that book here close by because I had it on the last chat.
So did the El Pueblo Massacre play a part in Charles Bent becoming governor?
No, he was dead at this point.
Oh, was he?
Yeah,
I wasn't
Charles
for sure
Bent,
when he became the governor.
Yeah, Charles Bent was killed in 1847, early 1847, so he was dead before it took place.
I see. I knew that he got to be governor because of some kind of attack.
There we are. So, yeah, when Kearny, 1846, took over New Mexico without firing a shot, I just ripped a part off of my book. That's all right. This book was old and all in bad shape. But Kearny takes over New Mexico. It's like we talked in the last one. Took over without firing a shot. Then in the spring 1847, there was a revolt, and Charles Bent was killed with several other Anglos. Now, Stephen Watts Kearny had appointed Charles Bent as a civilian governor of New Mexico. He had left Doniphan with his Mormon battalion, and Doniphan was the military governor of New Mexico. But at the point this happened, the Mormon battalion was starting to break up because they had done their little enlistment. And so they were waiting for new ones to come in. But he gets killed January 19th, I believe, if I remember right on the date. And President Polk ordered that all flags be flown at half staff on that day, starting when he signed it in 47, and to be flown at half staff until law repealed it. And I've never seen anything where the law was repealed. So that was one thing I tried to do down at Bent's Fort was January 19th. We put the flag at half staff because of Polk's order, but we had this thing there. We always played 1846, so we never put it to half staff because the year we played was the year before that.
Okay. So
I was going to look and see. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. I was
going to look and see if they talk about. I don't think they talk about the El Pueblo Massacre here in Lavender's Bent's Fort because it takes place before it happened. Let's see. Yeah, they are going to mention it in passing because Lavender still called it the Milk Fort, and actually it was not the Milk Fort. The Milk Fort was something totally different. The Milk Fort was another little thing that Bent had that basically it's where they kept their milk cows and their milk goats, and it was, we think it's under where the rail yard in La Junta, Colorado is at now, because I think it's Louis Girard and James A. Bear both note that there was a little adobe structure about a day's travel, which was for wagons about 6 miles, which puts it right in La Junta, Colorado.
Go ahead. I'm looking for an answer.
Oh, no. It apparently was called El Pueblo, but it's not the same El Pueblo. Yeah, it says they had goats, donkeys, dogs, buffalo, calves, and children.
Yeah. Just to answer your question a little bit there, Doug, it's the trouble with, and maybe Duke can answer this. I should have just read it to him. He said, let me ask a book question. I want to learn more about the M1841 Mississippi rifle. Can't find any good sources. Thoughts?
I don't know on that one, to be honest with you.
I was just going through because I have a lot of books on rifled musketry. The only trouble is that's the 41 is a Whitney Harper's Ferry gun, and most of my books center around Springfield. Springfield did have some input on it, and it's not in there. But the only book I know mentions it, and I don't know if it's like 4 or 5 pages, and it's just letters back and forth. Is Erskine S. Allen, Director, U.S. Armory, Springfield, Massachusetts, inventing and manufacturing new weapons that won the Civil War. Kevin R. Spiker. So, it's a good book, but I think it's only a few letters. There's nothing really detailed in it, and it's a very expensive book. So, I don't know if that answers your question. Go ahead, Duke. You got something to say on it?
No, I was just going to say, being Doug brought up rifles, I got a little correction to make after our last stream on Garrett's channel where I was talking about, I mentioned that the 66 Winchesters, I said, and I said it wrong is what I did. I said something along the lines of they weren't really Winchesters. They were new improved Henrys. They weren't labeled as Winchesters. What I was trying to say is the first couple of years they were out, they were advertised as the new improved Henry. It wasn't until, and Doug gave me the year 1869, and I forget the numbers, like 25,000 mark, I think. Doug, correct me if I'm wrong. It's pretty close to that. That they start stamping Winchester on the barrel. That was what I was trying to say. Because when you find them mention the historic record, guys talk about, oh, we've got this new Henry rifle that we bought. Well, they're not talking about the Henry, the 1860 Henry. They're talking about the 1866 Winchester. 29,000 is what the number was. And so when I said that they weren't Winchesters, that's what I meant, is they were advertised as the new improved Henry repeating arms, or the Kings. There was what was it? Yeah, I found one advertisement that talks about the Kings loading gate being the main improvement. But yeah, I wasn't trying to say that they absolutely weren't Winchesters. They were Winchesters. Winchester had taken over pretty much the operation at that point, but they didn't have Winchester stamped on the barrel until 69. So hopefully I cleared that up a little bit.
Okay. So, Doug, and I don't know if this is the answer or not. This is a book I've looked into on more than one occasion and almost bought, but never have. It's called The Southern Arsenal, a study of U.S. Arsenal at Harper's Ferry. That should have even though it's made at Whitneyville, it's officially a Harper's Ferry product. It is a update of the 1803 Harper's Ferry rifle. And I'll say that again. It's called The Southern Arsenal, a study of the U.S. Arsenal at Harper's Ferry by Daniel B. Hartzler and James B. Whisker. And I don't know if that's in there or not, but it should be. That's one of the few books. There's not a lot of books on the Harper's Ferry Arsenal compared to the Springfield Arsenal. It's a 208-page book published by Old Bedford Village in 1996. Like I said, though, I don't know if that'll actually take you anywhere. But if you get it, I guess you got a good book, probably, providing it's a good book.
I just looked this one up here because I was trying to think. I knew of one that was out there, and I just found it here. It's called Panting for Glory, the Mississippi Rifles in the Mexican War. And it is printed by Texas A&M University Press. Published in 2016. So I'll read this. It says, armed with percussion rifles when most U.S. soldiers still carried flintlock muskets, the Mississippi Rifles served in the war against Mexico that followed the annexation of Texas in 1845. In Panting for Glory, the Mississippi Rifles in the Mexican-American War, Richard Bruce Wenders skillfully uncovers the contrasting wartime experiences of two regiments, the 1st and 2nd Mississippi Rifles.
Well, let's give old Doug a plug here because Antique Gunslinger said, Duke, do you have anything on Texas Rangers or any good books? I keep this one right by my chair all the time for reference.
Yep.
Doug Duke's Firearms of the Texas Rangers.
And Doug's book is great because there's a lot of information I bought a lot of books for looking for, specifically with firearms history when, back in the day when I was doing a lot of long format videos. And Doug's book kind of condenses all of that knowledge into one unit. And so it's a really great book.
It's easy to find what you're looking for.
Yep.
That's what I enjoy about it so much. I don't have to read the whole thing to find one section.
But I have a huge section of books on the Texas Rangers, the early Texas Republic. And I know I've got some. I know Doug's told me there's a couple that have some errors in them. But there's a lot of them out there. One of my favorite ones, and I know that's one that's got a few issues with it, is Captain Jack Crawford and the Captain Jack Crawford. No, wrong Jack Crawford. Now I got to go find that book. Give me a quick second.
Yeah. Sorry, I got to digging through this thing again. The Thompson submachine gun.
Jack Hayes. God, I had a brain fart on that one. So that's one of my favorite ones, but it does have a few things that are squirrely with it. And then I've got the Irregulars, which that one's an okay book. And I've got a dozen or more. I got a lot of books. And I added a lot of books here recently, too.
That Frank Hamer's shotgun look familiar, Duke?
Yeah, it do.
Looks like a very pre-Model 11, even though I think it is a Model 11, but it's got that suicide safety like yours.
And I thought about cutting mine down to be somewhat similar to that, still be 18-inch barrel until I shot that son of a gun. And then I decided, you know what, it's going to look just as good the way it is in my safe.
We got one that's cut down just like that. That's an actual Model 11 a little later. It's when you start cutting the barrels down, I found that it becomes unreliable with lighter shot. Feels like it needs that barrel to really get the recoil, the length of the barrel.
I tell you what,
good with like buckshot though.
Made a mistake one day. I took that thing out, shot it the first time, and I had a high brass shell, and I shot, and it kicked me, and I thought, oh man, that ring was upside down. And so I turned it over, and I shot one round, and nope, it was where it was supposed to be. Holy Moses, that like broke my shoulder. It cracked the forend, and then when I took it apart to glue it, I realized it's had that problem a lot of times. There is so much glue in that. I don't think there's much wood left. I think they just put red varnish on the glue. I go grab it and pull it out, but we can't do that anymore.
Gots Loco said on the 1841 Harper's Ferry, early military rifles from 1740 to 1850 by Nemeth it has some discussion. Let's see. Desert Boy said, Garrett, I was just typing a question asking if getting that Spiker book, asking if it was worth buying it, and you just brought it up. Really trippy. Yes, I am old. If you want information, there's stuff in here you won't find anywhere else. It's like $300 for this book right now. It's been $500 in the past. I don't know what it's at now, but I actually got a second. And I paid, I think, $200 and some for it because sometimes on certain pages the lettering's crooked and it runs off the page just a little bit. But yeah, not for the 1841 Harper's Ferry, obviously, but if you want to know the inside details on the muskets that were made during the Civil War, pre-Civil War, go back. There's hilarious stories about Springfield Armory, like up until about 1819 when old what's his name took over. Roswell Lee took over. I mean, basically everybody was going in there, clocking in, getting drunk, spend the whole day at work drunk. And he basically told them anybody that's drunk is going to be locked outside the building. Well, the next day they all went outside and staged protest. And he fired all of them. And he made a new policy. You can only work here if you're married and have a family that you have to support. It was a big deal. And they wouldn't, it's hilarious how when they first came in there, Whitney, Harper's Ferry, Springfield, Allen, all those guys, they had a agreement that if they fired somebody, the other company wouldn't hire them and they wouldn't try to poach each other's workers. It's in there. And then Samuel Colt came along, poached all of Springfield's workers. So they turned around and poached Harper's Ferry's workers, who turned around and poached Whitney's workers. And it was a whole big deal. It was a pretty funny story when you read it. Ready for some more comments?
Yeah, let's get through, man.
Okay. I've always wondered how long into the 1870s the Spencers were still in use by the cavalry out west before the complete switch to the Trapdoor Springfield.
74.
Yeah.
By 74, they were really starting to get swapped out.
They've started it way earlier, but yeah, they hung on. I
think Company K up at Fort Laramie, that was 74 when they got theirs.
Yeah. I mean, they started with the Ward Burton in 71, swapping them out. That didn't stick. And a lot of people forget the Sharps conversions that were there.
But as for the mass of the last year, it's 74 is about the last year that they were using Spencers. Yeah. And I don't even know. The Buffalo Soldiers, I think, even got swapped in pretty quick there, too.
Yeah.
Usually the Buffalo Soldiers were the last to get anything, just because of the fact that they were the Buffalo Soldiers. If I remember right, when the Army, most of the Army had gone to the 72 fatigue blouse, they're still wearing Civil War surplus shell jackets.
Yeah. A lot of the guns hadn't been updated since the 68, to be quite honest, as far as the infantry goes. Yeah. A lot of guys didn't get the 70s. But it's real funny that in 73, as far as Springfield's concerned, there was a huge push in 73 to get the carbines out. Rifles were a secondary thought. And so, I would say by 74, they had made, I need to look at my book, but thousands and thousands of carbines and already pushed them out to everybody with ammunition. Louisiana Gray says there are a lot of pictures in that Doug Dukes book for me and Caleb. Yeah, there's a lot of pictures, isn't there?
Yep.
Speaking of the Jared 1860 wants to know, speaking of the 1866 Winchester, did the carbine come out in 66 or later?
They were both released about the same time in 67. 67 is the earliest you really see them on the markets out here in the West, even. But they released the 24-inch rifle, same length as the Henry, just had a 4 in and loading gate, of course. And then they also released the carbine in the same year, and it was a 19-inch barrel.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Antique Gunslinger said, could you do a Tales of the Trail or a chat? Oh, you talking about, on Texas Rangers.
Oh, yeah. We can do that someday. But I think I want to get Doug Dukes in on that because that man knows more about it than I do. And I've forgotten a lot of what I read on him because I've had to read. Was it somebody said earlier I had to forget things to learn new things? A lot of the stuff that I knew on the Texas Rangers, I don't remember as well or as clearly. We will probably do that at some point.
A question here was Sabador 45, and it's funny because Caleb was just showing me this book. He was down at Washita or around there the other day, and he'd found a book on it. But Sabador 45 said, "What book do you recommend on Washita?"
Jerome Green's Washita is probably the best.
Is it a white kind of paperback covered book with a painting on the front of it with a white background? Yeah, that's the one Caleb had seen.
I've got copy over here somewhere. I've got to organize my bookshelf right now. I just threw books up on there, so I got things mixed all over. I need to get it put in a chronological order again. But Jerome Green's Washita is one of the better ones. pretty sure Life of George Bent, he gets into it.
You know, when you come down here, we ought to run down there. It's only about 45 minutes south of us.
I thought it was further than that.
Well, I don't think it's that far. But go ahead.
Actually, he don't mention Washita. He mentions Colonel Samuel Walker. That's not the guy that invented the gun. It's another guy. Guy that was up at Fort Laramie. He does not mention the Washita. And I don't know. Oh, it might be under the Cheyenne. Let's see here. Let's see. Because I think he was up north. Oh, there it is. Battle of Washita, 315 to 322. Yeah, so he gets into it. Yeah, this would be a good one. Yeah, Jerome Green's book is probably the best on it. And I don't think there's too many other authors that really touch on it. Not as well as Jerome Green. That's the only one that I really know of besides, like I said, Laurie for George Bent. Trying to think if there's any others that get into it. Oh, Custer's book, My Life on the Plains.
Yeah.
He gives a pretty accurate, he gives a description of the lodges as they go in through them, and he describes the interior of a lodge and what it looks like, and it's a pretty good description. But yeah, that's the only ones I can think of off the top of my head.
I was wrong. It's 169 miles south of us. I've been down there a couple times, but I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's more like a 3-hour drive.
Yeah, we could do her.
Yeah, that might be one of those where I take a week and come out and see y'all.
Okay, so scrolling on down through here. What are we talking about here? We went through that. Tim O'Neill said Bannerman wanted to buy all of them, and he made ammunition. I don't know for sure what he was talking about there. He said I have an 11, 18-inch military use bead blasted, preserved in motor varnish. Bannerman wanted to buy all of them, and he made ammunition. Serpent Hanzo said, speaking of Civil War musket, anyone familiar with the Colt 1861 Special Contract musket? Yes, I am. Pretty extensively familiar with that one, even though I don't own one. I'd like to own one, but I've done the study on it. It's it all fits in. An interesting story is that contract musket is literally half infield, half Springfield, because when Colt had hired out Elijah Root over to the infield factory to set up their machinery, and then one of the infield factories closed, and Colt bought all that machinery outright from one of the actual infield factories. There was more than one. They did in England. They didn't build anything under one roof. And so he owned a lot of that machinery already. And when the Civil War fired up, he was ready to make 1861 contract muskets. Well, the Springfield contract musket is an all Springfield design. And he had this machinery that he could make a half Springfield, it looks like Springfield on the outside, but the internal of the locks work like an infield. And they have the barrel bands are screwed down instead of clipped in with barrel band retaining springs. And it was one of those deals where Root and Erskine Allen were writing back and forth a lot, talking about what they were going to do. And eventually it got the soldiers like the Colt contract so much, which they made over 100,000 of them, him and one other company. They liked that Colt contract musket so much that when Springfield updated to the model of 1863, basically that gun has the narrower barrel bands, has the screw hold barrel bands, and the internal lock change that is basically a Colt contract rifle. Well, the band started slipping, and they made the 1864, which is basically the same thing, but went back to locking springs on the barrel bands to hold them in position. So yeah, that Colt contract rifle is a very interesting story. And there's also a very interesting story. I don't have time to get into it here about how they used it to beat out the Remington contract rifle, Zouave rifle, how Colt basically on his deathbed, that was one of the last things he did was make sure he beat Remington to that deal. And that's why the Zouave 1863 Remington contract rifles sit in a warehouse and were never used, basically. Louisiana Gray said, yes, sir, I'd love to see Doug Dukes on the show for a talk about Texas Rangers. What Trapdoor Antique Gunslinger said, what Trapdoor would be affordable for someone to just have one?
Cheaper to buy an original than a reproduction.
And they're not getting cheaper.
No.
But we were laughing because we used to always say the 73 was the common one, 73-77. And we always said, we'll get that one last because it's everywhere. Well, it turned out the 84 was by far the most common one because they all got updated to it. And the 73 was probably one of the most expensive ones. But yeah, if you want one just to have, the cheapest one you're probably going to find, there's a couple things you can do. You can go with a 50-70 Bannerman cut down if you're not looking for, because you can get those for $400 or $500. They're cut down shorter and they're not military spec. Some of them are completely built out of parts after even into the 1900s, but they're still good guns. I have one actually behind the door over there. But if you don't want to do 50-70, go find you you're looking for cheap. I'd say if you want it in military condition, look for the 1884 with the model with the why can I not think of that site? What's the name of that site, dude?
The Buffington.
The Buffington. Man, my brain fell apart there. The Buffington rear sight is going to be the cheapest one because it's by far the most common one still around today, the 1884 model. And if you're looking to save money, I wouldn't even bother looking for a carbine because any carbine is going to run you. Everybody associates the carbines with Custer. It doesn't matter if they're in the serial number range or not, and they're just very, very expensive.
Yeah, I just looked up a broker, and they're all about the same, anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500, and that's new and original.
Yeah,
but I tell you what, the original don't break like the Pedersolis do.
That I've never messed with. Well, I can't pick it up, but right here beside me, I actually have a H&R copy. It's a pretty good copy.
They're really good. If you can find one of them, go with them. There was one that went on auction. That was on auction here. Boy, it's getting late. I talked myself out. And it was getting up there pretty high. But they are so close to the originals that I've heard you can even swap original parts on them. But the problem with the Pedersolis,
I was just going to say H&R bought some of the original equipment from Springfield, and that's why they're so close.
But the problem with the Pedersolis is on that extractor, the ejector. When they mill that is so thin that after you shoot it so much, the tip of that extractor breaks to where it won't even grab the shell. And what happens is, as you go to put it in, it goes past that extractor. But when you fold the trapdoor back down, then the extractor hits it because the curve of the arc, it winds up hitting the shell, and you can't load it. So they're a pain. They can be a pain in the butt. I had that happen up there at Fort Laramie. And we're shooting blanks, and this thing broke on me. Yeah, when I looked at it, I mean, it's such a thin piece of metal. I could break it with my thumbnail if I really wanted to. So if you get one of those, be ready. Just buy you a couple extra extractors. And for goodness sakes, when you go to take that thing apart, pull the barrel from the stock. Don't do like the one guy up there did. I needed the replacement part. We didn't have one. Well, we happened to have a rifle that had a cracked stock. And no, it wasn't that. It had a broken sear. It had a broken sear on it because whenever a gun breaks, we tag it out and then they would buy parts. And, well, then rules changed this and that and the other. But went to salvage part off that, and this guy, bless him, decided he was going to do it quick and easy. Instead of taking that thing off, he just took a hammer and he whacked that pin that holds it in place and blew the side of the stock out. There was nothing wrong with it. In fact, we was going to take the stock off that. There was another trapdoor that had a broken, cracked stock. It was cracked right in the grip. And other than that, it was fully functional. He's going to swap the stock. And when he did that, it busted the side out. And of course, once it's got splinters, then we can't use it at all.
Wow.
I was like, well, I got the part. I got my rifle going, but now we've got two carbines down.
The best way I found to do that, because you're talking about the receiver fitting tight and where they scoop those old stocks out, and that's such tight where the receiver fits, right?
Well, I'm talking about is that pin that holds the trapdoor on.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It pushes in, and then the stock holds it in place.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, it's all.
Guy did not pull the barrel out, and so when he hit that pin, it just blew the side of the stock out. Because I watched him hit that pin. He didn't even open the trapdoor. He just grabbed that brass mallet, whack.
You can't do anything on that gun without taking that barrel and receiver out.
When it was all said and done,
and it's not hard to do.
I went up there and looked at it. When it was all said and done, we had plenty of functional rifles. Because if I remember, we did have a stock up in there that they forgot they'd bought, because they bought all kinds of spare parts when they bought these guns because they knew they would break. When it was all said and done, we had several functional carbines. But
that's sad. A gray rider asked. Go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say, and then after he retired, he brought in the one that his brother, from his brother's estate. And I looked at that, and he says, "Man," he says, "this thing closes really hard and really rough." And he says, "Can you take a look at it and tell me what it needs done?"
Did you say pull the shell out of it?
No, I was sitting there looking at it, and I said, well, "How many times did it?" Oh no, my brother never shot it. I'm like, Joe. No, I wasn't going to say his name, but I did. I was like, Joe, you've got to break this thing in. It's like brand new.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was it replica or original?
Yeah, it was a Pedersoli. It was newer than the ones we had. The ones that we had when they bought them must have been early on in the production when Pedersoli was making them, because they weren't that great. His was, oh my goodness, it was, and even the extractor was in a little bit better condition, but the trapdoor wouldn't close unless you really rammed on it. I'm like, you kind of got to break the spring in.
Mm-hmm. I never handled one that new, so I wouldn't know.
And the thing it was several years old, but it had never been fired. So
and it was just tight fit.
And it was like my other friend, he bought the Sharps, and I'm in the process of paying off that I'm buying from him. And it was a 4570. It was a old IAD, and it's a 63 conversion to a sporting rifle. And when he got it, you couldn't pull the front trigger. He said the front trigger would not, so you had to use the set trigger. And I'm sitting there thinking, it's like, well, yeah, there's a couple of those Pedersolis I've come across with the flintlocks. My first flintlock, you couldn't use the main trigger, and I thought, well, maybe they did that as a safety. And I was sitting there pulling on it. When you get to about 45 pounds of pressure, when the tip of my finger was turning white and going numb, it suddenly broke. Dang, that is weird.
It's a heavy trigger.
So he had a snap cap. I put a snap cap in there, and for 30 minutes, I just cocked that thing and pulled that trigger. And then we go out and shoot it. And when it was after, we dropped that hammer with that trigger about 100 times, suddenly it's now a 25 to 30 pound trigger pull, more manageable, but it had never been shot. It was like brand new. And what had happened is that stock was rubbing on the sear, because sometimes you pull a set trigger and the set trigger wouldn't even set it off. It was so tight. But then it has that old safety that the Garrett Sharps have, that you got to it flips up and blocks the hammer from falling. Mm-hmm. We're sitting there and we're trying to shoot, and this thing will not go off. And I thought, oh, great, we sheared a firing pin. And then I pulled it up, and I was like, oh, I forgot about that safety. Flipped it off, boom, go off every time.
Away you go. And I'd like a Sharps too. I was just talking to Jake about that the other day. I'd like a Sharps, but kind of got set in my mind. I want a 50-70 carbine just to be a little different. Since you're already going to have the other one.
And I wanted one too, and I thought, I really like to have one of those modern reproduction ones. I don't want to carry an original around because I'm going to use it for living history, and I'd feel bad if I busted up an original. So I come across one online, Taylor's 5070 Sharps carbine, but $2,000 was a little bit too much money at the time, still is.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to spend that, I'll get a Spencer.
Great Rider said 1860 Army or Thunderer. I think the context is he wants to know if you like the 1860 Army or the original Thunderer better.
I haven't shot the Thunder, so I'm going to pick the Army.
Yeah, I got it over there, but I still have to. Historically, I have to pick the Army because just for Civil War history, I guess.
Yep. But yeah, I'm not played with a Thunder. I've played around with a modern reproduction of a Thunder, which is not the original Thunder.
Well, you played around with ours.
Yeah, that's the one. And the way that thing kicks with that bird's head grip, I do not like that bird's head grip.
No, you've messed with our original Thunder. You made a short on it.
Oh yeah, I played with it, but I didn't get to.
We didn't shoot it. None of us shoot it because we haven't got 41 reloading equipment at the moment. Saboteur said, "When is 11 Bang Bang going to get a mountain howitzer? Don't give Caleb any ideas." Jared 1860 said, "What's a good bullet mold for 45 Colt black powder? Went to order from Big Lube, and apparently they are out of business as of last month."
Oh boy, yeah, Big Lube bullets. I knew they was probably going to go out soon. There's another company out there. I think it's Cowboy Bullet Molds. They have a lot of bullet molds, like for Spencers and stuff. But I think they make them to order. They're expensive. You're talking almost $200 a mold. The next best one is a Lyman, and I don't remember the numbers on it. I know they still produce it. It does not have the square bottom grease screws. It's got round bottom grease screws, but they're deeper, and they are about as close to the original Colt bullet as you can get. But I cannot remember the Lyman number. It's like 5 numbers, 48,000 some odd, whatever it is. They pop up every once in a while. Somewhere I have it written down. I looked them up recently, and yeah, they're not cheap either. They're not cheap, but they're cheaper than because if I remember right, the Cowboy bullet molds, I think they're 175 because they've got. And Garrett, you're going to have to get one of those molds because they've got the original 5650 Spencer bullets.
Yeah,
you guys get that Spencer up and running.
You need to. I make do actually on my original loads. It's not historically accurate, but I can make do with the Lee a 255 grain round flat point. And it's not historically accurate, but I clean my gun every time afterwards. I mostly just get black powder fouling, but then Benji from Mill Creek Range cast some up with some special mold he had that was like 100% original.
Right.
And he sent me some of those, and those were sweet. Those were really nice. I had nothing in the barrel basically when I was done.
I got to run to the bathroom right quick. I'll be right back.
All right. Tim O'Neill says he would like a 55 Mississippi rifle replica. Just having fun said there was a rimfire trapdoor. The Spencer was originally in rimfire. Was there a Sharps rimfire conversion? I have a rimfire trapdoor. I can't pick it up or YouTube will have a fit. Give me just a second. I'm going to step off screen too. Just give me a second, guys. I think I actually have. Wait. No, that's for Springfields. I have a book that will tell me. Just give me just a second.
All right, I'm back.
I'm back too. So, and you might be able to answer this. Just having fun said there was a rimfire trapdoor. The Spencer was originally in rimfire. Was there a Sharps rimfire conversion?
Not that I know of, because the ones that Sharp started converting was 5070.
This is my pride and joy, signed by Harmsmere. Let's see here. Model 1866, because he has everything in here that was 65 and post. Let's see. The Joslin, Navy Cadet, Springfield Remington. 1870. Army Sharps Historical. Let's see, Army Sharps, that's what we're looking for. That's Remington. There's a lot of different Remington adoptions in there. The 1871 rifle, modified from the 1865 Spencer. Sharps rifle muskets. So they first start experimenting in 1870, so I'm going to assume that at that point there's no rimfires. Now, and by the way, this is just military. It doesn't mean that there's not a civilian version in rimfire. Rolling blocks, more rolling blocks. There we go. There's a Spencer infantry rifle. That'd be kind of cool to have one of those Spencer rifles. The model 1870 Sharps conversions. Experimental model, type 1 and 2 carbine only. The first thing they mention is that it was strong enough to hold up to any military cartridge, obviously.
Thing of it is I've kind of been looking at some of the cartridges that Sharps offered, because I was trying to get into that 1860s period.
Mm-hmm.
And they have everything. I don't recall ever seeing a rimfire Sharps rifle. I did see a lot of center fires because they had, what was it? There was the 4490, which they said was a very heavy recoiling rifle. Then there was, there was a bunch of different calibers in there. I can't even remember what all they were, but there was like 4 or 5 different options before 74.
Yeah. Right here, this paragraph describes it. As early as 1858, the Sharps Rifle Manufacturing Company had begun to work on converting Sharps action to fire self-contained metallic cartridges. But the Ordnance Department, after some initial testing, declined to continue the work, as they were having enough trouble procuring approved models. But as the war was ending, the Ordnance Department again expressed an interest in metallic conversions, which, by the way, everybody always says they didn't want to convert anything. They were slow. Yeah, well, they were already working on it before the war was over, trust me. In 1865, Chief of Ordnance General Dyer, I always pronounce his name Dyer, requested the company furnish a price estimate for converting 5,000 of the Sharps progression carbines on hand and furnish suitable metallic cartridges for them. Competitive trials and preliminary work delayed the delivery of the first carbines until February of 68. By the end of the 1869, a total of 31,184 Sharps have been converted to fire the 5070 cartridge, the majority of them carbines. With this background, we can now discuss the relatively scarce Springfield converted Sharps arms of 1871, blah, 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 blah. So, evidently, their first successful conversions were in 5070.
Yep.
And that's in the 58 50 caliber rifles of carbines, the Springfield Armory, 1865 through 72 by Richard A. Holmesmere. It's a good book for collectors only. I don't know why it says that. Oh, okay. A couple more things here. Stabator said, I found a straight trigger plate for my Sharps. Might start getting it converted to straight stock. Base Art said, what are your thoughts on modern black powder substitutes compared to powder from the era? Go, Duke.
So, Pirate X, Yeah, a lot of people use it because it's more readily available. It's cheaper. Problem is that it's very high in salt content. It's got a lot. It's basically like shooting salt down your barrel. I shot it a lot when I was younger, and that thing, that Pyrex, if you're not on top of it and extremely thorough in your cleaning, can turn your gun into a rust bucket overnight. I had one gun. Well, it was the first one I have. It's sitting right there. I made the mistake and I went shooting one day when it was pretty humid, and I came back and I set it on my desk and left it there for 2 days. And when I picked it up, I couldn't even cycle to action. It was completely rusted up. So obviously Garrett's talking to somebody.
Yeah, sorry. I was getting my supper order in. What were you saying?
Yeah, the modern substitutes, I mean, if that's all you can get your hands on, then use it. But if you can use actual black powder, and black powder itself is corrosive just because it does use saltpeter, which is a salt. Thing of it is I have shot guns with regular black powder, and I have left them unclean.
I'm a witness
for an extended period of time.
6 months.
And they come out just as clean. Somebody cleaned them the day after.
That little white film in there.
Yeah. Well, I was like, you wait long enough, that powder residue just dries out, and you just down the barrel, and it comes flying out of there and run a thing. Yeah, you might get a little rust out of it, but with that Pyrex, it'll pit within a few days if you don't get on top of it.
You want to go? You want to go to? I'm sorry. You want to go to 2 hours?
Yeah,
hour 56 right now.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to show here before I get off is, y'all know I've got a big collection of books, and I just, oh my goodness, I added to the collection. So I recently won an auction at the school library. The school I went to, they was getting rid of a bunch of books, and because they built a new school and they're closing the old one down, and so books that hadn't been checked out for years, they kicked them off. And it goes to tell you nobody is interested in history anymore. Most of the books I got were history books. But yeah, I managed to get my hands on, for $26. I think the estimate is there's 200 books that I've got sitting in the back of my uncle's truck that I got to get unloaded here tomorrow. A lot of them are just junk that they're not. There's a lot of world atlases. I've got the 2015 World Atlas. I've got the 1978 World Atlas. And the 78 World Atlas, the books are, 14 inches tall and 12 inches wide and about that thick. And I swear to God, that box weighs about 150 pounds. They put them all in one box.
Over in our library, in our school there, we have the whole series of Science of the World Today, 1981. Science of the World Today, 1982. Science of the World Today, 1983.
Unfortunately, the one set of books that I wanted, the whole reason I bid on it, they broke it up into 2 different lots. I didn't know that when I bought it, so I got half of that series. And I didn't know it. The lot that I bid on was the one that went for the most money. It would have been about $70 if I'd have won the lots on all the books. I'm glad I didn't bid. I would have had over 500 books.
Was there any historical books in there?
Oh yeah. And the thing is, I got a lot of the World War II history series. I also got some weird ones like Divorce for Children. I got that book that was written in 1970 something. I've got crime. There's a book series on crime that gets into the different things like theft, guns, drugs.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah,
the guns and drugs part, anyway.
Some of that stuff is still sitting out there in the car because it's just like I don't know what to do with it. But some of the more interesting ones I got was Air Commando 1, the kind of the secret wars that were going on over in Europe. And these were donated by an estate and never checked out. This book here doesn't even have a checkout card in it. I got the Wild Blue, which is on the B-24s that were flying in Europe. And if you're not familiar, Jimmy Stewart, the actor, was a pilot on a B-24 in Europe. This one was never checked out. And these things were given to the library out of this estate in 2009. We got the Mediterranean Theater, the Path to Victory. This is all about the Mediterranean. This is a big book.
That's for $26 right there.
Yeah, if not more. Stalingrad, another big thick book. Never checked out. I got the book on the man who flew the Memphis Belle, the pilot of the Memphis Belle. I was checked out once in 2011. That was it. And that's his memoirs too. I got Lone Star Nation. So Doug, if you've got this book, if you've read it, I'd like to know if it's any good. Never checked out. Got quite a few fiction books. One of the more interesting one is Gone for Soldiers by Jeff Shara, the guy that wrote Gods and Generals and Gettysburg. Checked out once in 2009, right after it was.
Is that part of the Killer Angels series?
No, this is on the Mexican-American War.
Oh, okay.
So it's still going to be talking about a lot of those guys because, a lot of the Confederate generals and a lot of the Union generals got their start in the Mexican-American War. So this one is a fiction book. So this one, I don't know if I'm going to keep or not.
Bus and feathers.
Pass it on. But the series that I really wanted, and I got to go grab the other 4 books. And then I got one of the Time Life Western series. My mother has this series. I got the one on the Chiefs. I didn't know. I forgot they had this up in the library, and the rest of this was in the other lot. We couldn't view the lots before.
Oh, man.
It was all online.
I still have that collection.
So I got this one out of the series, but the one I really wanted was on aviation. So I got 10 books. There's 23 books in this series. I got the first 10 of them, and I got to go grab the 4 that. Ouch.
Doug said Lone Star Nation is great.
Good. So the 4 books that I absolutely wanted, and these books have been repaired. And that's because when I was a kid, up there at high school, by the time I got to the junior high, because the junior high used the same library as the high school, the movie Pearl Harbor came out. And today, as a historian, I don't like that movie. I can't stand it. But when I was a kid, the whole pilot part of it, put the love story aside, I could care less about that. But the whole fighting thing just got me interested. And so I start getting into building model airplanes because I go down to Walmart and here they got a Spitfire model and they got a P-40 model on the shelf. And it's like, that's the 2 main planes that one main character flies, the Spitfire. I had to have them. That got me started into building model airplanes. I haven't done that for years. In fact, I got more models sitting in my uncle's house that are uncompleted that I know he wants me to get rid of. But I've got some. For me, it was the Fokker DR1 Sopwith Camel, the Albatross. That was my gig because I had Red Baron, the DOS game, Red Baron on the computer when I was little. Right. So anyway, when I was getting into all that, I go up there to that library and they've got this series and they've got these 4 books that are on World War II. And so I started checking them out religiously. I mean, I was into the World War II planes. I've got pictures somewhere around here that I was drawing Jap Zeros. I was drawing P-40s. I've got a whole mural that I drew of the Battle of or Pearl Harbor, where I got these 2 P-40s up there shooting down Zeros and Zeros dropping bombs. But my bombs, after watching the movie, I thought every bomb looked like an atomic bomb when it went off. So I got all these atomic bomb mushroom clouds all over the place. But anyway, I was using this for a reference. And so the checkout sheet for this book on this particular one, which is the Carrier War, those stamps there on the checkout are all me. Because I started in December of 2002, went through the spring semester. I checked them out again in the fall. And then in 2006, I forgot I checked this book out in 2006 because in 2006, we had to write paper in our English class, kind of a research paper, and I decided to do a research paper on the South Pacific, the airplane war in the South Pacific, and how effective carriers were and how they changed the course of the war. So I checked this book out in 2006. This one, same thing. I checked this out in 2006, America and the Air War, because that was part of that research paper too. But once again, every one of those is me. Because I go back in and recheck it out and recheck it out and recheck it out. The Luftwaffe, that one was, I didn't check this one out as much because I wasn't doing research papers on it, but those are all me. And I think that book is about to fall apart again.
You know, with all these books, we're going to have to change the name.
Yeah.
But, Tales of the Kid Trails to Berlin.
But this book, they had to be repaired constantly because I was just pouring through them and the binding was falling apart. But then this one here was all me again. RAF at War. So I checked out these 4 books out of that series pretty religiously. And when I seen that lot go up for sale, what they sell in school, I was just going through it because the number one thing I wanted in that auction was actually the walk-in freezer that they were selling out of the school. And it was at $4,000 when I got to it. And I thought, I'm just going to go through. I'm going to see if there's anything I want, because, I went to school there. And when this popped up and I seen those, because on the picture they showed the Luftwaffe and the RAF in the one box, I said, I got to buy that set. And I thought it was 6 boxes of books. I got up there and it was 12. It was the biggest of the lot.
So you still don't know what all you got?
What's that?
You still don't know what all you got, huh?
I still have no idea what all I've got. I've got to go through all that up there. But some of these, this one had never been checked out. That one's never been checked out. And I don't think, I think a lot of these I didn't check out because that's not what I was interested in. I was interested in the World War II section. But yeah, there may have been one other guy that checked them out when I was checking them out. Okay, this one got checked out more recently, 2019. Some note where they were changing the numbers on it, apparently. Oh, yeah, I did check out the airships, 2003. I forgot I checked that one out.
That'd be a cool one.
Yeah, learning about I was trying to find stuff about the blimps that they put up because I couldn't understand why they kept putting blimps up above the ships when you was watching Saving Private Ryan and the boats are all there with the blimps. I couldn't figure out what that was. And then I realized it was anti-Stuka blimps. But yeah, I got a ton of books. I've got several books on German history that I'm not going to bring out because they've got that one symbol that I don't want to get taken down for putting up here.
I bought a set of books at an auction one time and found a copy of Mein Kampf in it.
That was what I was just about to say. I checked that book out when I was in junior high, just because we were studying up on, that particular person. And I just wanted to see how crazy he really was. And I read his book and I realized he can't write worth a dang. Excellent speaker, but he couldn't write worth a dang. And I thought maybe that was
fired up.
But no, I thought that book would be in this set, and then I found out that they had pulled it quite a while.
Yeah, imagine that.
But I do have some other ones on, Germany and World War II. I'll just leave it at that. One really cool one that I got: Federalist Papers.
Oh yeah, I know that book.
This book was printed in 1983. It was put in the library in 1983. It's never been opened.
Huh.
It's got some, the cover's got a little bit of yellowing. The pages have yellowed, of course. I opened the back, and that tells you how new it is. It won't flip open. The back of it doesn't have a crease in it.
Yeah.
That's set on the shelf from 1983.
That's kind of sad that all those books are sitting in libraries and nobody's ever even opened it.
Yep. Yeah, under the cover. September 1st, 1983 is when this was acquired into the library. And so this little book, I think I'm going to hang on to it. Some of these books I'm going to try possibly to sell. If I could find anybody that even wants to buy. I mean, who wants a world atlas from the 1980s?
We got a couple questions here before we go out.
Yep.
Serpent Hanzo had one up there, but Kent just wrote one in. Kent said, do break top revolvers have much history in the Old West? I've always wanted one. Absolutely. More history than a lot of people give them credit for. Everything from the Smith & Wesson Model 1 or number 1, which is actually a bottom break. Wild Bill Hickok was carrying a number 3, which is a bottom break when he was killed. The Schofield is a top break. The Model 1 American or American first type, whatever you call it, is a top break. And in the 1880s and 90s, gazillions of little pocket top breaks in 32 and 38 Smith & Wesson, like cheap, and everybody made them all over. Yeah, that was one of the most popular handguns in the West, was a top break. You got any good top break stories, dude?
Not off the top of my head. I just know that Lonesome Charlie Reynolds had some form of top break Smith & Wesson at Little Bighorn. One of the
like a number 1 American. Texas Jack Alejandro had one.
Yep, and I was trying to think. It was either I think it was one of the Janice brothers had possibly a top break up there. But yeah, some of the other books I got too here before we close off is I got Mutiny on a Bounty, another one that was never opened, 1983, and Drums Along the Mohawk.
Oh, that's a good one.
And this one they ripped the thing out of, I'm guessing because it'd been checked out quite a bit. This one has been read. It's about to fall apart.
Well, it was probably required reading would be my guess.
Yeah. And then I got one on General Chuck Yeager and Leo Janos. That one was checked out in 2000, and I think I know who the kid was that checked it out.
Didn't he break the speed of one with a broken hip?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
he had to close the door with a broom handle.
Yeah. Here's another one, and I forgot. I was the last one to check this one out too. Midway.
Very good.
I checked it out in 2003, and the whole reason I checked it out was because, like I said, I was also drawing pictures, and they had these wonderful pictures of these planes.
Yeah.
So, yes, I did check out a book just to look at the pictures. Because I don't remember reading it, but I remember looking at the pictures.
You want to do one more comment before we head out of here?
Yeah, let's do one.
Serpent Hanzo asks, which would you rather have, Blondie Snake Grit Navy or Angel Eyes Remington?
Navy.
Sorry, it's gonna be a Colt every time.
If I need a hammer, I'll grab the Remington. Gotta go out and fix some fence. You know, that solid top strap frame, you know, just great for hammering in a nail.
Saboteur 45 said, off topic, do any of you listen to Sabaton? For the grace, for the might of the Lord, for the home of the holy.
For the home of the holy.
For the way, for the might of the sword. I'm sorry.
Now, you all guys got to play that, but you got to do it the rock way.
Yeah.
Have that church jamming.
From their Sergeant York one is good too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good ones. Anyway, you about ready to go?
I think we are. So I think the next week we'll do this is, I got to look at the calendar here right quick. So in 2 weeks, it'll be the 27th. And if Garrett's up for it, we might try to do one then. Mm-hmm. My schedule may be shifting, so we'll keep an eye out for that. I was going to try to do this one tomorrow, but it just worked out better to do it here tonight. Then Garrett, you got your Christmas special next week?
Yep. Wednesday night. Are you not going to be there for that one?
Yeah, I'll probably be in Wyoming, if not I'll be on the road home. But if I'm in early enough, I might be here for it. So are you going to have that one ready to go?
I will see. I will try. I will try. Finally, I will try. Every time I listen to it, it gets stuck in my head, so I ought to just do it. I just got to get all the words to the last verses down.
Right. And then we got to start on the next one. You got to get your finger picking on the banjo practice in.
Yeah, I do. Oh, I'm ready when you are.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming in here tonight. Wound up going a lot longer than I anticipated. The topic, we only went over for about the first half hour. Yeah, so call it good for tonight. The next chat, I don't know what we'll talk about. I know Garrett wants to get into the Cheyenne outbreak, and what did I just do with it? There it is.
Yeah,
so I've got a couple of books. I got a couple books on it that we're going to go over. I got to read. I've been reading on one by Jerome Green, which I think that's Morning Star. No, it's not Morning Star Dawn. It is. I done forgot the title of it, but anyway, it's a Jerome Green book, and then Tell Them We Are Going Home is also about it. So I'm going to read up on that.
Cheyenne Autumn's required viewing, right?
Yeah. This deck's light a few aces. I need a new deck over here.
That was a great show, except for that scene.
Jimmy Stewart is a wonderful actor, and he cannot play Wyatt Earp with a darn.
That scene did not belong in that movie. None of that Dodge City stuff belonged in that movie.
I think they just did it to get Jimmy Stewart in there to sell it.
Yeah, I think so.
And I could not figure out for the life of me, because I know they came up to Fort Laramie and they was doing something at Fort Laramie. I could not figure out where they filmed it there. And I asked my friend Steve, I said, I have watched that movie 5 times. I said, I can't find Fort Laramie in it. He says, they didn't film here. I said, well, why did they have a big thing here? And they said it was a promotional. They came to Fort Laramie and filmed the promotionals for the movie because for whatever reason, they couldn't film it at Fort Robinson. So they went to Fort Laramie instead. But yeah, they've got Jimmy Stewart there. They got the woman in there. I think, if I remember right, they've got a picture. Yeah, they've got a picture of her, Jimmy Stewart, and Richard Widmark with headdresses on. That was given to them by the Cheyenne. So yeah, it was a big to-do thing they had there at Fort Laramie, but it was just to promote it. It had nothing to do with the site. But anyway, that's probably won't be the next one, but after the first of the year, we are going to touch on that. Because I got a lot of reading to do, because I need to kind of read as to, what happened, kind of the last battle that the Cheyenne took in during the Great Sioux War. And then that'll lead into what happened there at Fort Robinson. And if you're kind of curious as to what happened, Garrett's got a travel vlog video on his channel. They came up to Wyoming and we went over to Fort Robinson and we talked about that a bit while we was up there. So that kind of set the stage for this discussion. But the next one, if we're able to do it on 27th, I have no idea what the topic will be. I'll come up with something. Who knows? We might touch on the Fetterman fight again. We've only beat that horse enough that.
Oh, you can always beat it a few more times.
Yeah. No, we'll hit on something.
Most people ride that horse till it's dead. Duke comes along, gets that horse up, rides it 20 more miles, then eats it.
Yeah. Well, what I might do is get into kind of the aftermath, because that's one thing I haven't talked into real depth into is what happened immediately after that up there at Fort Phil Kearny. And
we also haven't done Nez Perce, or we haven't done Wounded Knee either. So there's all sorts of stuff to cover up there. That
book is going to take me a while. That is a thick book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really good book. But yeah, and Wounded Knee, that's one I don't want to touch on too heavy, because that one's a very, very sad, sad story. And yeah, but we'll have something figured out for the next one. Probably be like tonight. We'll just announce it when we get on here.
So
anyway, yeah. So anyway, thank you all for coming on tonight. Like I said, look for us on the 27th. Look for Garrett's Christmas show on the 20th. And until then, stay tuned. Keep your powder dry. Stay safe out there.
Bye.